Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. This is the fourth episode of Anu with You. I am your host, Roei Eisenberg, the founder and executive director of Anu, and we are in our blitz of last get out the vote efforts. And this podcast is the jewel in our crown, I think, where we've been hosting people to talk about their own Anu journey, why they support us. So in this episode, I'm so grateful to be joined by Jess, our campaign manager, and Rabbi Daniel Sher, one of our Slate members, and such a terrific human being and an incredibly resilient leader in our LA community. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Excited.
Yeah, so we'll be talking to Daniel about what drew him to ANU, to the World Zionist Congress, why he sees this as an avenue for change that he, despite the so many things that he is currently dealing with, is investing, like many of us, so much of his personal time and probably not sleeping enough. We'll talk about overcoming tragedy as a community, about the fires in Israel. We'll talk about what he's learned from leading this recovery in a community that really, truly was devastated by the fires in LA in January. And we'll close out with, we can't have a rabbi on the podcast without closing out by talking about what Torah says about ethical leadership, which I know he has a lot to say about. So we will try to keep this podcast under an hour for our listeners and for ourselves, because we all have to get back to our day jobs. Again, thank you all for joining us. And yeah, let's kick it off. Daniel, we met in January, a week before the fires, and we'll get to that later in the episode. But I want to ask you, so why the World Zionist Congress? Why now? Why ANU?
Well, so those are three distinct and I think really important questions. The first being why, World Zionist Congress? I've been thinking a lot about what it means to live in definitives, right? And especially, again, we'll get to the fires, but this idea of living in what we assume to be permanent versus what our tradition has actually done so much of our history, which is live in the grand experiment. And one of the ways that I've always learned and appreciated and loved Israel altogether is the grand experiment. What is the experiment of a modern Jewish state? What is the experiment of different ideals and versions and values going forward? And so when the World Zionist Congress first started and the grand experiment that led to the state of Israel, then people sometimes forget that the experiment's not over. And there's nothing I find more fascinating than being a part of the experiment, seeing what unfolds next. And so when we imagine that something is just, this is what it is, it's not an answer I've ever understood. It's not an answer that's certainly not a Jewish answer, right? Because even if you take at its face value the most basic of our values or principles or laws, there is a group of rabbis arguing about that very law. I mean, just today, I was thinking about the teaching of Hillel and Shammai, who argue about how to use Torah. And one side says Torah should only be for the knowledgeable because it shows our reverence and respect for the text, which makes sense because of reverence and respect for the text. And the other says, no, 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 you should be bringing it to everyone because Torah should be for the people, which makes sense because if we're having some form of chosenness to be chosen to be the people who bring this book to the world, bring it to the world. And here, they're arguing about the most basic way of engaging in our sacred text, and both of them can respect and understand where the other's coming from. So, going back to why World Zionist Congress, this idea of being part of that experiment and adding our voice in and making sure that not only will our voice be heard, but prioritizing that voices be heard is a really important piece of this. Anu, from day one, from the moment we started talking, said it stood for certain principles, right, of peoplehood and pluralism and peace. And the part that I think is so profound about peoplehood to start with and pluralism from there, and from that going into peace, is all the voices are necessary. For it to be peoplehood, it requires a spectrum of people and thoughts and opinions and values, which is how we get to the respect of the notion of pluralism at its core, how it would work, which would bring the world to a place of actual peace. And so it's not just about our voice being a part of this Congress, but about prioritizing that the voices in the Congress also be heard. The fight doesn't end at elections.
Yeah.
It's about how it operates and how it runs and how the voting happens and then how the decision making happens. All of that matters equally.
Great.
Speechless.
Amazing.
Okay, I feel like we should just have you talk. No questions, but thank you for that. That was brilliant, a brilliant answer, and not like the British way of saying brilliant. Like I mean it.
It was a good idea. Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
Yentl agrees.
Yeah, until agreed.
So as we're sitting here today, this will be released tomorrow. But we are sitting here on Israel's Yom Ha'atzmaut when
Yeah.
many of the celebrations had to be canceled, and not just because the hostage families had asked them to be canceled, but because of the fires,
Yeah.
which sadly we saw some people use for political means to try to castigate a people, the Palestinian people, and claim that they were responsible for these fires. But now it does look, I was just seeing in between recordings that police is pretty certain that this was the responsibility of reckless hikers and climate change, as we know, which was very much what happened to us in Los Angeles, right? January, you're going to remember the date much more than I am, but I think it was January,
January 7th.
okay, 7th,
I could even hear
when,
that in your voice, the change of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, last night alone, we had a Havdalah of healing and this notion. And at it, I spoke about the not irony, but the beauty of having our Havdalah of healing in the crux of Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut. And when you think about, I go back to that grand experiment. Part of that experiment is how we learn and connect to our Jewish world together. And sometimes we don't find the answers in Torah. We find the answers in rabbinic tangents that come from Torah portions. Don't get me wrong there, but sometimes it's modern Torah. It's the modern understanding of the way our people express and grieve and celebrate all at the same time. And that moment, that switch from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut, what I've always loved about it, besides the fact that they don't use Yom HaZikaron as a chance to sell mattresses, right? It's the worst part of the way we've made this mistake in America. But beyond that, when you enter Yom HaAtzmaut, you don't forget the sadness and pain that you held a minute earlier. You bring that pain into the expression of celebration. And so there's something really that I thought was so important. And we connected it to this notion of many people will dip their finger in the wine and put it behind their ear after Havdalah, which might look bizarre if you've never seen it. But the idea behind it is so sweet. It's just one last drop of Shabbat I want to carry with me into the week. And instead, we talked about what it means to know you carry part of your experiences forward, right? What does it mean to intentionally put that drop of wine behind the ear and move into the week? What does it mean to take the sadness of loss and the recognition of what we've lost and go into celebrating what we still can have, what can be built, what can be dreamed? And so, yeah, these last 3.5 months have been, almost 4 months now, have been something I can't fully encapsulate. I can't fully express, but I can say we don't waste tragedy in Judaism. We've always seen tragedy and use it as a space to grow and to build and to shape and shift the world. And so there is a deep connection. And on the day of the fire, friends in Israel, who, by the way, were dealing with those 5 weeks or 4 weeks of hostage release, those painful weeks of hostage release. And at the same time, we're reaching out and asking if I was okay. And so the flip side of that, now checking in with many of them and saying, I explicitly know this shared experience. And I know what it's going to be like. And having that ability to deepen our connection to our larger Jewish community and to really celebrate that notion of peoplehood through pain and through what we do with the knowledge of how we weather that pain. It's not lost to me. And it's not over, right? The pain of loss is not over. I remember walking into a store and the clerk said, "I'm so sorry that that promotion ended. It was for 30% off of clothing." And I said, "This is not your fault. I just want to suggest that you say we're no longer running that because it's not a promo and it hasn't ended for us. And these things take time." There was fires in Israel 5 or 6 years ago that I still know people who were finishing the aftermath of that. And these things take a lot of time. And it's leaning on the people who we love and who we're connected to that we actually weather them, because the news cycle moves very quickly by it.
it does.
Especially today, it's so hard to, some of it can even feel by design, but of course, then there's these kind of disasters that happen, and you want to give the space for the grief. But I mean, I have 10 news apps on my phone, which is a different issue that we won't discuss here. But it is very difficult to give grief the space that we need to give it to be able to move on. And can we even call it grief if it's ongoing? Isn't grief at the end of something? So what is even that part of having to carry on with your sadness? I love that. I teach Hebrew school on Sundays, and my grandfather was a rabbi. My dad's sort of a chazan. I had never heard that taking it with you thing, but it's something that we continue to carry on with us, because there is no, and this is over and now we can grieve. We have to.
And at some point, the things that caused us the deepest sense of will eventually manifest in some form of sweetness. It takes time. I can't tell you when, right? But even some of the stories of these last few months have changed the way we engage the people around us, have changed the way we hold our children, have changed the way, I mean, you name it. I was never going to Marie Kondo my house. I'm a Jew. First of all, I don't even think it's a Jewish idea because we don't believe in decluttering. Right. Last night, Amy Bernstein, the senior rabbi that I work with, said we don't declutter. We add value into it. We add message and meaning and love and history.
We
I was
invented the
holding.
word tchotchke.
My God, right? And by the way,
Ebenezer,
we
literally.
don't get rid of it. We bury it. We can go back later if we really want to, right? Like it's not. But beyond that, like, and there's a lot to that. I had a Kiddush cup that was hundreds of years old that I bought in the old city that I brought back. It actually had tested and proven that it had the age to it that I thought, and it wasn't just some story. And I lost it. It's gone. I found the shell of it. And the cantor I work with said during the very first week, and I said, I can't, my kids loved Kiddush cups. We had like 20. I would let them pick which one we were going to use each Friday night. They would kind of argue about it. That's why you got to keep getting more. And we had each bar mitzvah one and each baby naming one and like all kinds of beautiful things. He said, when you raise this Kiddush cup this Friday night, whatever one you go and replace with, close your eyes and imagine that 50 years from now, your grandchild is going to say Kiddush with the cup and say, this is the cup that my grandpa, that my Saba first blessed our family the week after the fire. So we make new and we embed that new meaning. And then I will be just as upset if that cup doesn't make it a few generations, right? Because that's part of how we express that love. And so when we're all the way across the world, they're holding a Kiddush cup too. They're taking inventory too. Meanwhile, there's other pain in their lives. And, we spoke about Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaTzmaut, but Roei, you touched upon it earlier. For the hostage families, the idea of mass celebration didn't make sense. But at the same time, to think that there wasn't a pride in their identity during that day would have also been a neglection of the real complexity of their moment, and that you can hold those truths and that you can have opposition. We have this thing, maybe it's just I would like to speak only on behalf of America on this moment, but like the idea through social media that like everything is zero sum and you must always support or you reject. Critical love is the better love. And so when we forget that, it's like, wait, what about all the people there who are showing that critical love? What about every time I have to hold my child and say, you're actually in the wrong, right? Like that critical, collaborative, constructive love, that's the harder, more important one. And so I think that's a crucial part, again, of why ANU, why World Zionist Congress, why be involved. And also, I hope everyone can emulate that piece. If you love, you do have to be critical. There's a way, of course, but if you love, you do have to help make it stronger.
It's interesting because in these few ones that we've done and just in conversations with other Slate members outside of the podcast, I think there are these recurring themes to Anu. And part of it really is holding these differences, but also allowing the growth and how that kind of evolution is necessary for democracy, for ecosystems, and how that happens to all of us. It's so interesting to hear that with a different kind of perspective, which is also the Anu way. We have different professionals with different backgrounds, and somehow everyone manages to say similar things through their lens. It's so beautiful.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because we use the word resilience a lot, right? Speaking of these themes, and I was in a global Jewry roundtable. So it's for Jewish leaders, and the session was about post-trauma resilience and growth. And I talked about my disability journey. And I just said, and I was like, well, it made me more resilient. And the psychologist who led the session stopped me. She goes, no, it didn't. The resilience is what allowed you to keep going. But what the journey did was it made you grow. And those are two very separate ways. The resilience is what allows you to bounce back to where you were. But you didn't just bounce back. You grew from the experience. You took that pain and you built something with it. And you became, I talked about becoming more empathic and learning to see the pain in others and be more patient. I'm Israeli. I used to be an angry driver. And one of the things that I did, and it's going to sound so silly, but I talked to my therapist at the time, and I would get so angry in the LA traffic. And she would tell me, before you start yelling at that driver, imagine why they might be doing that. Maybe they're late for their child pickup. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're late for work and their boss might fire them. So before you get angry at them, imagine why. And she told me, and take the most charitable of those and think that one, stick to that. It's a practice that I wish more people learned, because we're so quick to assume the worst, something that social psychology calls the fundamental attribution error, which I think social media has made a lot worse. It's like, I do something bad because the context, but you do something bad because you're a bad person.
Well, but there's one step further, right? Like, I
Ooh.
totally agree. Know their story and then make sure that when you are in a moment where your story might parallel that you still remember outward facing to act in a way that reduces that burden for others, right? Like, and I'm not saying that you should be super, like, I'm not saying like, don't let your pain be expressed. Believe me, there is plenty of people who are waiting for an email back for a couple months now from me. And this is my public apology. You might get it, you might not, right? Like, I was overwhelmed beyond belief, right? But before I get angry at that other driver, I'm going to know they have a story and I have a story too. And now our deal is to make sure that our story can be respected and authenticated without it obliterating or overshadowing what we actually need to interact as a society. I'm not talking about niceties, but this is the same thing with everything that we're working for right now. If the Jewish people are going to have some form of experimental congressional work that oversees and supports global Judaism, then we have to each be walking in with our own agenda and find a way to respect the wants and needs and opinions of the other people in the room. And that is hard work. And so when I'm having a terrible day, sometimes I have to find a space for that terrible day to be mine before I walk in and I let it affect my kids. Or 4 days after the fire, we had a bar mitzvah. I didn't pretend that we weren't all numb and in pain, but I also made sure that that child who had worked all that time to prepare for it didn't get all of that eclipsed by something else we were dealing with. And there's a social responsibility to that I think a lot of people don't take into account.
I heard two things in what you said, and the first is the grace, the chesed, or maybe loving kindness, right? Not grace. As an ESL learner, sometimes I'm like, wait, no, I think there's a difference between these words. I
Yeah.
don't think grace and loving kindness are the same. And yet they're related. There's something to
Yes.
both of them that is definitely what we need in this moment. But I'm also hearing you talk about what one of my favorite educators talked about, which is education is the process of going from point A to point B, right? Is of growth. And I want to talk more about your growth. And so I mentioned it earlier, but Daniel and I met at a Hanukkah party, the seventh night of Hanukkah, if I remember. I was invited by a mutual friend who I'm in the Wexner Heritage program with, Nate Miller, a mensch. And I'm at this party, hanging out with the people that I do know. And he grabs me and he says, for your party, for Anu, you need to meet someone. He's like, he's gonna be perfect. And took me. And it was funny. And he's like, and I'm going to take you to my favorite place in the house. And he took me to the fire pit and he introduced us. And he said, you guys are going to talk, and talk. We did. and it was a fantastic talk. And Nate, if you're hearing this, 100%, this was a beautiful match, because we hit it off right away. And something that I've thought about since, right? Because I met you in this moment in time. right? It was Hanukkah, right before your entire world which changed, right before
Yeah.
everything that was around us, because he was your neighbor, right before everything
Yeah.
burned but that fire pit where we first made this connection and where he had so many meaningful moments.
Yeah.
Now your life has been changed so much, and I want to really ask you to dig in and reflect and talk to me how your leadership has changed as a result of this growth and of these last 3.5 months, and where you are as a person from point A to point B.
Well, so we often think about leadership as a frontal experience or as like being in the front of the line or like paving the path. But the truth is that leadership is communal care, right? We're caretakers of a
Mm,
community. Rabbis are not supposed to be the trailblazer. They might trailblaze, but they do it through a means of communal care. And I did pastoral education at a hospital, and the supervisor said, you don't walk into a room and know the answer because you're not a doctor. So don't walk into a hospital room and give anyone in that hospital room an answer because that's not the right way to do this. You get into the room with them and they're in a boat and they're rowing a boat and you sit down and you pick up an oar and you row with them. And that's always stuck with me on a lot of the way people will ask advice. Say, well, I'm not going to get to a point of giving you advice, but we can work through the problem together. And I can bring my own perspective and you can choose what to use of it. And we're a community member before we're anything else. Now, that might be the reason it's called a leader is because my job is to care for the community. And that's no deeper experience than I've had in these last 4 months. Having to talk to someone who lost their home and then share that I lost mine in itself becomes, do I want to burden them while they're already burdened with that burden? But it would be inauthentic to our relationship if I didn't share that piece. And now what we share is so much deeper. And it's not even just about our homes, it's our community, right? Like I told people that I had one of the only shtetl rabbi jobs in the country. The Palisades were like a mile and a half of I saw more Jews at the park and at the than I did at shul because everyone bumped into each other. And so we were a true shtetl, and now we're a diaspora congregation. We're all over the place and we're finding ways to make that work. And again, we don't waste tragedy. We have that roadmap. We've seen how the rabbis do that. And you know how they did that? They innovated. They created Talmud. They took something that could have just been a group journal and instead changed the face of Jewish experience forever. They used what could have been the thing that broke them and instead made it the thing that innovated them and allowed them to exist all the way to now. And so my leadership, my style is that we are in such a deep sense of innovation and we are finding ways to do things differently, whether it be holding services in a different space or coming up with a different way to engage or to connect or to whatever it might be. We cannot just do what's been done. And it's not about the flashiest, it's not about the coolest, it's about the effective ways of connecting to our community and finding our version of Talmud. What are we going to do to connect and have a shared experience and a shared code and a shared expression that will allow us to at some point reunify and reconnect?
That's beautiful. I'm still on the group journal. I'm never going to be able to look at social media the same way because I think that's the difference, right? Social media is this group journal. We haven't elevated it yet. We haven't found a way to make it Talmudic, despite the fact that it's a lot of Jews arguing. So close and not
And
there.
the tangents are just as wonderful. I mean, I posted one video and I like waited 2 weeks to respond to anything because everyone just took it for their own journey and they were like, name your source. Like, where did you get that? And I was like, and I waited until people started suggesting where they thought the sources were, which opened into a totally new conversation of, well, why would he choose that? Where would he have gone with that? And I wanted to be like, these are all better answers than I would have given. And that's also the truth, is like to pretend that, again, with leadership, to pretend that I already have the sermon would negate the process
Mm.
and the learning and the hearing other voices and the connecting those different dots. And that's half the fun.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. I think I'm also hearing in that, in the modern day, We're all so nervous about silence, right? We're all trying to fill the silence, and yet the tension of the silence, from an educator's point of view, that's how we get people to push themselves. That's how we get people to really like reflect on those words that you gave, and then bring something out of them, and not just like let the leader, right? We're talking about frontal leadership. If the frontal leader is always filling up the space, then the learners aren't growing as much as they could.
I'm reminded by that. I never trusted my writing. If you talk to people who have known me for years, they have definitely heard I'm not a book rabbi. I'm more of a schmooze rabbi. Like that was the kind of thing I would say. I just didn't have faith that like the things that if someone asked me for a copy of a sermon, I would send them the YouTube instead of sending them the document. Because whatever, chalk it up to, oh, my grammar is not going to be right, or oh, they're not going to read it with the right inference and tone, or it's just not going to come out right. I had all this doubt in my ability. And something clicked after the fires where I said, my doubt doesn't really matter. And I just started writing and started posting and started sending in an article for this, or when someone would ask for something else or a write up. And by the way, half of it doesn't have my name on it. It would be, I really think this needs to be out there, and we put it into something else. Or it's and the reason is that I always assumed, because I had a hard time learning to write, and I had a hard time with I was a math and science kid. I used to call it street smarts over book smarts, but like I don't think that's really what it was. I think I didn't learn some of the mechanisms early enough, and then was smart enough to get through without actually learning the fundamentals. And so I had to learn some of it later. But what's changed for me is that expressing the point is more important than being fearful of the mechanism and the means. And so I've learned a lot about it has to be said. It's words that need to be shared. I've written blessings and meditations and things that I've always respected but felt like would be inauthentic if I tried to produce. And now I'm feeling a lot more confidence and a will to pour my heart into writing a prayer of healing, writing a prayer of resilience, right? Sharing a connection of what it means to be clearing the chametz just weeks ago, and my understanding of what that meant this year to kind of clear out the chametz from from everything going on and to step into the next process. And so there's a newfound, I wouldn't even call it a confidence. I think a hurdle was removed because there was just so many other big things going on. And that's going to be counted as one of the blessings when I turn back. Someone I work with once said to me, this whole thing is going to be a sentence in the story one day. No matter how big of a moment it is right now, one day it's just a sentence. And so we have to get everything we can from it and know that what I'm looking forward to is sharing the story.
Something I get from that, and I might be just interpreting in a different way. Sometimes so much of our fear, our insecurities are from ego, and our ego trying to protect us from being vulnerable and being rejected. It's not always necessarily a negative thing, but it is part of ego. And it sounds like something that you had to push aside in order to rise to be the leader that your community has needed was to put that ego away. And I think sometimes when people think about leadership, they don't take away the ego. Some of the people that want to be our leaders, I feel like, do it through their ego to be at the forefront. But effective leadership seems to be you confronting your ego in this case and saying, the message I have to get out is more important than my fear of my writing.
It may be ego. It may be ego, and it may be what I would consider to be a lethal combination of ego and distrust, right? Because if you have healthy ego and know that you are loved for being you, then falling down a peg or two shouldn't cause you shame and embarrassment. But if your ego is tied to successes in such a way that if you don't sound like the brilliant person, that you are not going to be respected the same, my home burned too. Like I know that sounds so funny to say at this point when we said it earlier, but if I said something and it didn't resonate, my community was going to treat me with love. And so it was really more about trusting that my community, trusting that the people who would hear it would take it at its best, would allow me to then take ego as a drive. But you're right. If you see yours, if ego becomes the way in which you judge the success and not through a deeper sense of connection and community, then it becomes a really dangerous thing.
Mm.
But if you can, with confidence, speak your truth, and then with confidence hear the way it's received, then ego becomes a drive.
Mm.
And so I think that's also a very large part of this, right? We have to ask somebody, would you really run? Would you pretend that you are someone that should be on the World Zionist Congress and help make decisions of over $1 billion of funding for worldwide Jewish engagement if you didn't think that your brain was worth being a part of it? There's ego there.
Mm.
But there's also humility and a deep sense of the community around us and all of those pieces that I think really matter too. All great leaders have some ego, right? It's about whether or not it become the driver
Mhm.
behind the rest of their actions.
I'm hearing what you're saying call back to two of my favorite books. And one is The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Everybody knows Brave New World, right? They all made us read it. But Aldous was a brilliant intellectual. And what he did is he tried to gather what was the philosophy that everybody around the world shared. Like, what is the perennial philosophy that no matter where in the world you grew up, your civilization came up with? And one, that's how I found out that my favorite writer was anti-Semitic, because he seemed to have forgotten the Jews. And two, what he talks about is actually like in order to reach that wisdom, all of these civilizations understood that actually you need your ego to grow in order for your ego to go down. And it's this like incredible paradox of you have to believe that you can be wise or else you will never be wise. And so your ego has to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, actually, in order for you to be able to step back and say, I might be wise, but there is somebody out there wiser than me. I might be brilliant. I might be a good writer, but there's a better writer out there. And to be okay with that, to not have that cause a crisis of confidence. And the other thing I'm hearing, and I'm so excited to hear your sermons later this year, because it's making me think a lot about Rabbi Alan Liu. And one of my favorite books about Jewish tradition is just This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. And specifically, the journey he takes, and then that Sukkot chapter, right? Like he starts with the walls falling down and he ends with no shelter. And I am so excited to be a guest of your sermons this year in this journey of transformation, because you have learned so much and grown so much. And what I'm hearing from you gives me so much hope for our people's future, given the immense tragedies that we are in the midst of, right? 59 people still held hostage for 573 days. Since the creation of Israel, no Jew has ever been in captivity for that long. As far as we know, Israelis know his name, but there was a pilot who was shot down over Syria. His name was Ron Arad, and his remains were never found. The Mossad spent decades trying to find them. And so there was a pretty long period that people thought he was alive. Eventually, a Syrian intelligence officer leaked that he died. He was never actually like held in captivity. And so up until October 7th, like this has never happened since we got agency over our own destiny. And I know I just took it to a dark place when I was talking about hope. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm Jewish.
But in fact, if we need to separate them, we'd be disrespecting them, right? Like our experience is complicated. I know everyone like to pretend that like ChatGPT is replacing us all, but let's make very clear the human mind is a brilliant, complicated, nuanced, beautiful experience that has these things all tied up together. I said to a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Becca Schatz, I said, I wish I had 10 more years of Talmud under my belt before this happened, because I feel like I don't have the words to say. And she said, aren't you just going to need 10 more years after that if it happened after? Like, are we ever really going to feel prepared for these moments? And the truth is, it's not about what you've got in your go bag. It's not about what tricks you've preemptively planned. It's about your willingness to hold complicated. And it was about our willingness to allow laughter to peer through the tears. And it's about our willingness to still celebrate and have pride while being saddened. And it's about the willingness to, if the Israeli spirit was actually broken, it's been more broken than it's been, but if it was actually broken, imagine what the last
Mm,
573 days would have been like. I was in Israel a month and a half ago, and there's a powerful expression of love all over the place. You can hold multiple truths. We are complex creatures who can do that. That's our B'Tselem Elohim, right? That's what makes us in the image of God, is that we don't have to flip the card over and go to a new feeling. We can hold all of it. And that seems nearly divine to be able to do that.
absolutely. I mean, we can't talk about this until later, but the Anu WhatsApp chat that's dealing with the election fraud, let me tell you, is very much holding both the anger, the fear, the frustration, and the memes in that chat are, as the kids say, well, I'm sorry, but fire. It's a force, and
Yeah.
I want to use this because you're so right about this, about the more I feel that. I've read so many books and I always feel like, well, if I had just read this book, but I would know how to respond even better because I haven't read 10 years of Torah. I'm Israeli. I started reading like 6 years ago. And we can thank Rabbi David Kasher for his love of Torah, just infecting anyone who ever speaks to him. Literally took this secular Jew and made him read the Torah, like joyfully. Like I loved it. I went into it. I mean, some of those parshas, you have to admit, Rabbi, like
Whoa.
a little
Yeah.
tough. Some of them are whoa, and some of them are like, what am I reading? But that's a separate podcast episode. But what
Well,
we
but
are,
it's not. But wait. But don't
but
lose
it's not.
this. Don't lose this. You're not supposed to read Torah like a book.
Mm,
You're supposed to read Torah in collaboration. You're supposed to study in Chevruta. If you read it by yourself and you get lost, yeah, why'd you get lost? Because this is not meant for one brain's interpretation. I have a Torah study with a group of 20 to 30 people every Saturday morning, and if we make it past 4 lines of Torah in an hour, we're lucky, right? And by the way, that's good. Torah was designed to be consumed in community, in partnership, in chavruta. And so those weird portions, they just leave you more room for conversation. And every time you read your worldview into what you read, you become the co-author of
mm.
Torah. Every year, when you reread the same book, I've shared it before. Do you understand that Torah is the same length as the first Harry Potter book? I'm talking Sorcerer's Stone, all right? We're not talking about a grandly huge book.
Oh,
We read that book every single year, broken up over all the weeks. It's not that long. If you read Torah every single year, you'll memorize it. Everybody who gets impressed when the rabbi's like, oh, yes, Leviticus 23. That's because it's not that long. It's really not. And so when you fall in love with it, why would we reread the same book that's that short every single year? And it's because your experience throughout that year will change the way you can interpret
mm,
and share the values of that book. You are a co-author. You are a collaborator. You are not an audience. And so that's how we have to hold everything we do in Judaism. If you care about it, you are now a co-creator of it. You are a collaborator in it. You are a caretaker of it. It is not a passive experience. So those odd sections, the ones that are so dry, when I have a bar mitzvah student who comes in and goes, evidently my Torah portion is about what parts of the cow are kosher. Great. Right? Like what my portion is about the different forms of sacrifice. I'm like, oh, let's get into that, right? Because in that, we're going to get somewhere where their worldview is suddenly going to change the way we read that portion. And so go back to what you've always stood for. Why we're doing this, why you want to be a part of this, why Anu matters is because collaboration is everything in Judaism. It's everything. And it's proven by our most basic tenets and our most basic principles and our most basic actions in reading of our text. But I cut you off. I couldn't help it. So I just want to.
no, I love that so much. And you're right, like 100%. And it's I love that Judaism has this built into it. I'll also say for the Seinfeld Jews among us, I've found this in many of our, let's call them texts and cultural artifacts, because for those who don't know, like in the last year, I had a son. I had my first child, and I my Passover tradition is to watch Prince of Egypt after the Seder, if it's not too long.
I believe
And
that's in our texts as well.
that one is in our texts. And this year, and it happened to me during the Haggadah too, but the Haggadah was short because, 8-month-old son. The Seder was a little shorter than usual, but as we were watching it while he's sleeping on me, and it came to the 10th plague, and I had never felt the 10th plague like that before. I'm just weeping, like I am just weeping for the Egyptian loss. And it was transformative. I've been watching this movie for 25 years, and I had a transformative experience this year because of what happened to me this year. And I'm going to throw it back to you and say, you've had a year. What has in your chavruta, in your experience, now that you are rereading these Torah portions, what are they telling you about ethical leadership? Is it possible? And how do we share it with everyone, right? Like a big part of Anu's mission statement is education. Yes, we want your vote, but we are more than just the World Zionist Congress. Anu is a new movement, and part of that movement is educational. We want to bring people in, people who have felt like they didn't have that space because maybe they weren't religious enough, maybe they didn't read the Torah growing up. We want to make that space. And so what does your Torah say about ethical leadership now, and how do we share it?
Torah is a political book. It's a
Ooh.
book of it is politics are caring about the way in which the world around you unfolds and how we navigate through all the trials and tribulations of the world. It's not partisan, but it's political, right? It's not about the party, it's about the politic. And the politics are the engagement of caring about the world around us, caring about our community, doing what's necessary. And so there's so many examples of ethical leadership through our text. And the best part is all of our leaders are flawed.
Yeah.
Right? Ethical leadership doesn't mean perfection. But right now, we're witch hunt driven, right? We want to say, you've made this mistake. I can't trust you. You're out. But what that's going to lead to is a world in which no one is good enough to actually be the leader. Because every single person who pretends that they are the one you should vote for also is holding their breath that you never actually get to go through their entire internet history. Right? Because the world is full of regular people who have all had to explore the world around them in order to find their voice and to find their version of the world around them. And so I say that because Moses is going to be this grand example. Moses messes up so much. It's wild, right? You go into Exodus and you go into Yitro and you go into his father-in-law is like, this system isn't working. You should have a form of governance in which you don't have to deal with everything. You have people who can deal with it and bring you the issues. He didn't say that because he liked Moses just because. He said that because Moses was neglecting his family. But there's no way on the campaign trail that anyone was going to say, this person's not actually home with their family. Look at that pretty picture you saw of their family, but they're actually never home with them. Because we don't want to hold the hard truth, right? Yitro said, hey, my daughter needs some focus, needs some help. You don't get to do this 24/7. You have to do that too. You made a commitment. Ethical leadership was realizing that he wasn't working through perfection. He needed to find others who were capable and trustworthy so that he also could do the things personally he needed to do. There's a humility and service to it, right? Moses is described as the most humble of leaders, an essential trait for leaders. By the way, this humble leader also couldn't respect when God said, talk to a rock, the same God that fed them cloudy with a chance of meatball style with manna from the sky. And this is the God that suddenly you're like, hit a rock? That's absurd.
The
Absurd.
ocean.
We're part of the sea. The 10 plagues, you fed them from the sky with manna. A rock? That's where you drew the line? No, he had a temper and he was done. Because he had a bad day. Didn't mean he wasn't humble. And so sometimes the other piece of this is that we have to find the valuable parts of leaders and celebrate those parts of them without pretending perfection. Moses is a humble leader. Ethical leadership in Torah is not about power or control, but it's about serving. Moses served the people. He didn't serve it with perfection, but he did serve them with deep, deep love. And the humility, and this idea of humility resonates with my vision of leadership for WZO, for everything we're looking at, right? Fostering collaboration, listening to diverse voices, serving the larger community with respect and care. Moses takes a group of people that, if you remember at the Exodus story, who crosses the sea? Is it just the Israelites? No, it's mixed multitude. It's the people who choose to walk with the Israelites, the people who choose to take on this form of ethical understanding and connection. And Moses becomes all of their leader,
Mm.
right? And I think that's so profound. Justice, fairness, the way we find leaders. Joshua's the perfect example of the next leader. No, it's the example of the leader that we're given, right? And so there's all these different pieces, whether going to Leviticus and the idea of balance, right? Finding balance and strength, how we deal with caring for the person around us. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is not saying love them unconditionally. Do you love you unconditionally? Have you ever been mad at yourself? Have you ever been disappointed with the words you say? Do you give up on you, or do you hold yourself accountable for a little while? Again, ethical leadership is caring about the world the way you care for yourself. But most kind people don't care for themselves the way they care for others. When you just say someone's kind, someone has niceties, someone who's very polite. Well, yeah, good. I'm glad you're polite. And are you giving the same care to the person that you said no thank you to as you do to yourself? Or did you just dismiss that for a one-off conversation and move on? And so our text really pushes these different pieces. And lastly, I want to point out that our text champions faith in people. It's not about faith in God alone, it's faith in people. The Torah reflects a deep faith in the potential of people. Right? Go back to Exodus, and God tells the Israelites, you shall be to me a nation, a holy nation of people. Leaders are tasked with inspiring and empowering others to live up to their potential. God doesn't say, here's the way you're going to inspire them. You are going to be for me a holy nation, filled, a kingdom of priests, it says. What does that mean? Does everyone need to be a priest? No. A kingdom of people, a nation of people, a peoplehood filled with ethical leaders who can connect to something greater and know that it serves the world around them. And so it's about lifting up all voices and believing in the strength and the diversity and the future, right? By connecting these different principles of ethical leadership. I want to point out that this is the goal, right? This is the Anu goal, right? That it's not just about commitment to pluralism, but it's about peace for all people. And I hope that this represents a version of leadership that's both responsible and forward thinking, one that honors tradition, strengthens collective identity, and ensures that it's a thriving, inclusive future for all Jews around the world. Right? I hope that we can all keep and celebrate this passion for bringing these kind of values to the forefront of the Zionist expression and the Zionist leadership, and working towards a future where all voices are heard as part of that great experiment.
I mean, also like the earlier part of that statement hit me. Like I'm
Yeah.
definitely in my Yitra moment, which is why I'm grateful that you're both here and that Jess, when we sign off from this podcast and I have to go clean the dishes for all the baby food so that he can eat when he comes home, I'm very grateful that I have such an incredible team in Anu and at home to support me in very much my flawed leadership that is getting better by the day. I promise, Tiffany, when you hear this podcast episode, getting better by the day, doing my best. I love that so much. You embody the Anu spirit in so many ways. And I'm so honored and grateful to be on this journey with you and with Jess. And we, as of a few hours ago, started a new way to end the podcast. But I feel like you just answered it. So I'm going to give you another chance to find a different way of answering the question, which is, what brings you hope for our community?
Our community. I've not been devoid of hope because I'm not a person who's found myself in isolation. And as long as I know there's always a voice I haven't yet heard, as long as I know there is always something there that we don't have to be isolated. Being alone for a minute's okay, but to know that we have that community, that's the strength that I draw upon. And that would be true devastation, to lose community. And so that's part of what we fight for with all of this, is that there has to be people at the table who can celebrate that everyone's at the table and not just their own agenda. And so my hope comes from community.
Beautiful. Perfect. I think that actually brings us to, this is a podcast in the last week of Get Out the Vote for the World Zionist Congress election. And so aside from all of those incredibly deep reflections about growth and Judaism and leadership and accepting who we are as a people as a people and as a person, please make sure that by May 4th, 59 p.m. Pacific, you go to zionistelection.org and you vote, right? That's going to be my first message. Most important, if you've heard me speak on any other podcasts or at any of the debates, and Jess sometimes wants to be like, it's not just about, but it is. We need to vote so that there are more people at the table. Many of the people who are on competing slates signed our petition to get on the ballot because they understood that it's important for us. They don't agree. Some of them vehemently don't agree with us. And yet they knew it was important for us to be at the table. And that a democracy only works if we give people options, right? This is the Jewish democracy. No two options here. We might be Americans, but for Jews, there are multiple options to choose for who represent you. There are 22 options for who represents you. And now I have to give the pitch that when you go to zionistelection.org, I hope you enjoyed what you've heard from us. And I hope that it inspires you to vote number 6, Anu, a new union, so that we can represent you at that table, so that this incredible slate of flawed leaders who are growing and learning every day, some of us in different parts of that journey, right? And Rabbi Daniel will clearly be back for another episode to talk about all these different archetypes that we have in the Torah. And even more importantly, and something I'm very excited to learn from you, in the Talmud, right? Because those are characters as well, and they go on journeys. Yeah. And until then, remember, zionistelection.org. I'm going to keep saying it, and as we've said it all week, zionistelection.org, vote number 6. This episode will be coming out on Friday, May 2nd. So we also want to wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you so much, Rabbi Daniel, for joining us, for being on our slate, and for gracing us and providing such beautiful Torah for us on this day as we head into Shabbat. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for listening. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.